Welcome to Easily Entertained. My name is Bryson Olson, and here we talk about all the good things about entertainment. Today, we are talking about a movie I just saw recently, but actually it came out, I believe, like 2019, so a little bit back. It's called The Vast of Night. I have never heard of this movie before, but I saw an interview of Jack Quaid for Companion back when I was doing that video, and he was talking about his favorite movies, and this was one, and I had never heard of it, but it sounded pretty interesting, so I watched it, and it's pretty good. So let's talk about it. So the story of The Vast of Night takes place in the 50s in New Mexico in a made-up town called Cayuga. It's kind of like middle of nowhere town, but it's very reminiscent of like Roswell. So you can kind of guess where the story goes once I mention that. So you follow two characters, a switchboard operator by the name of Faye and a radio host by the name of Everett. It takes place on this single night, and pretty much everyone in this 500 people town are all at a basketball game for the local high school. It's a big event, as small towns are, so they kind of all get together, and everyone's gone, and there's only a few people that aren't at the game. And of course, it's those few people that are going to experience some crazy things. And in this one, Everett's handling his radio station, and Faye is handling her phone switchboard, while her mom, who is usually operating it, is out doing something else. Not like a hugely relevant detail, it's just like kind of explaining it. Faye's like kind of younger, like high school age, and Everett seems to be like more, maybe like college age type person, like 20s, I would assume. Anyways, but while everyone is gone, Faye, when she's operating the switchboard, she gets a call, and there's no one on the other line, but she gets a very odd sound playing. And it's really hard to even describe what the sound is, because they just did such a good job in the movie of making something so unique. So instead, I'll just play it. So obviously that sound is a little bit strange, and understandably, Faye is very confused. She's still trying to do her thing, but that was a little bit weird. Thinking, maybe the phone lines are getting a little bit messed up. She gets a call from someone in the canyon, be like, there's something in the sky, it's hovering around my land, but the sound is kind of causing some interference, so she can't really understand that, but you as the audience can. But she continues to hear the sound and is like, that's so weird. And she goes back to the original sound. She's still so confused, and then she also eventually hears it on the radio. So she calls Everett at the radio station and is like, hey, there's this weird sound going. And so he listens to it, and he listens back to like the recording of the radio, and it's like, it is coming through. That's so weird. And so the whole thing kind of gets sparked by that moment where they're trying to figure out what this sound is. And Everett, being a radio host, he's like, this is good radio. We need to figure out what this is. So he takes the sound and he plays it over the air, and they're trying to figure out if anyone knows anything. So people are calling in. In particular, there are two people that call in throughout the night. This old military guy who calls in, he talks about his missions that he went on that were in the middle of the desert. I'm assuming, I can't remember if he says New Mexico or not, but something of that nature. But he's like, we're in the middle of the desert, and we heard that sound. And when we heard that sound, we saw something in the sky hiding in the clouds. Wild. It just gets so weird. And then there's also an old lady who tells a little story kind of regarding the sound, where she didn't hear the sound, but the way the man described his experience of seeing something in the sky and weird things going on related to her story. Her son disappeared mysteriously, and around the same time, she was also not hearing the sounds, but she was seeing weird things. And so there's all this tension and mystery from the one sound, and it's so well acted through these characters that call in, especially because you just don't see them all the time. When it's the phone call, it's not like you're cutting to the person, you're only seeing the characters in these huge long takes, and we're going to talk about those in a little bit too, because those are really good. But it's just unbelievable how they can say it so calmly yet so terrifying at the same time. It's like their calm demeanor is what is so unnerving about it. The man is talking about his weird military experience of, you know, seeing something in the sky that they don't know. The other lady is like, they've been to my house. They took my son. It's just so reminiscent of Roswell, and like when you hear about like those kind of alien abduction type stories where like sometimes they are a little bit ridiculous, and looking back on them it can seem a little bit ridiculous, but I can imagine like hearing someone talk about this, that's the feeling that this movie invokes. Is it's putting you in that situation. It's like, what would that be like if you heard someone talking about the alien encounter that they went through? And it's just, it's so very alien-esque. And like, not alien in the sense of like actual aliens, because you don't actually see any aliens in the show. But it's alien in like the confusion, in the unknown. That's why I titled the video what it is, because it's all unknown. It's from the perspective of the people, and they're just trying to figure out what is happening on the specific night. It's not an alien invasion. It doesn't seem like alien contact. It's not an abduction. It doesn't seem like government type machines or whatever. It's not any of that. And it's just the suspense of these characters out in the middle of nowhere that heard this weird, mysterious sound that set off this whole incident. It was the inciting incident of these characters just wanting to know more. And so they go out and do their whole little thing. And I think that's probably really good why it was set in the 1950s, because it's not like now where we can reach people across the planet and be like, hey, I just heard this weird sound. Did anyone else hear this? And especially at a time where, you know, they had like the Cold War and stuff. So tensions were already pretty high with anything a little bit mysterious. They're like, oh, could be communism. The Russians are coming. And so doing that and putting it in the middle of nowhere, and everyone is just so confused, just kind of heightens that sense of mystery and suspense. And it all comes from that one sound. That one sound is what amplifies everything and sets the movie forward and makes it so good.
Folks, it is 7:45 p.m. and we may have something that'll need some explaining here in Santa Fe. Oh, what? There is something in this.
So I mentioned in the last section, you know, that kind of suspense and fear that kind of gets caused by the sound that plays back. But why? Why is it really effective at picking the suspense back up and ramping it up so much? Because it's not like it's a weird sound, but it's not like scary. You're not hearing a scream. You're not hearing a like creature. It's just a weird kind of warbling technology sound. So that it's like, why would that make the suspense continue to ramp up and kind of be a little unnerving and scary? Well, I think it comes down to two characteristics, being confusion and curiosity in our characters. So it's less about the characteristics of the sound, but more about the people who are listening to the sound. That kind of sound wouldn't really scare you if you just heard it by itself, but the sound gets scarier as you go throughout the story. It doesn't change, but the feeling it invokes does. When they first hear the sound, it's that confusion and curiosity. They don't know what it is, but they want to. And like I said, the story takes place in the 50s. This was a time of limited resources, like in terms of knowledge, like not everybody knew tons of things about everything. There was a lot of propaganda. There was a lot of fear. It was a crazy time. So the only way they could really learn about something is to actually go out and figure out what it is. They're investigating. And so that's where you can kind of get the curiosity side of it. They want to know. They want to investigate, not out of fear, but just because they want the knowledge. But that can lead them to learn things that they don't really want to know. The story takes place in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico. So you can have the curiosity there of characters that really don't know anything in their world, but also that's where you get the confusion as well. Every day is basically the same day. So when anything new happens, it feels a little bit weird. They're like, what was that? Why is that so confusing? You know, nothing that drastically changes in this town. So when something like this happens, they want to know why. They want to learn. They're not usually part of this kind of stuff. They're not like in New York or San Francisco or Las Vegas, where things are constantly happening, where they are probably very in the know because of news. In the middle of nowhere, news is probably not getting to them very fast. So that could spark a whole bunch of questions. They're confused and curious. Could it be Russian spies? Could it be the government? Could it be aliens? There is so many questions that can arise from a situation like this. And then combine that with all the other aspects, they're probably going to get even more confused, and then that just makes the questions come up even more. It's just a compounding loop. Okay, that doesn't really make sense that there's something in the sky. Why would there be something in the sky? But it's not a plane. What could be in the sky that isn't a plane? And then, you see how it can just branch out from there. There can be a whole ton of things. It can spiderweb, where one question leads to the next, but the answer goes back to the original question, and then it keeps going, and it goes back and forth and gets everywhere. And so that amplifies their confusion, and it amplifies their curiosity. It makes them have to piece together things like a whole puzzle, but they don't know what the end puzzle is. And so that's just more confusing. And for some reason, people keep throwing in more puzzle pieces. They don't have them all at once. And so that can become a little bit scary. They don't know. It's scary not knowing what everything is. That's the whole point of the title of this episode. Like I said earlier, the fear of the unknown is scary. And until you can know something that can decrease your fear a little bit, it'll continue to feel scary. But even in a situation like this where they are getting answers, their answers are just making more questions. It's making it more unknown, where most of the time questions make things more known, which would make it less scary. It's the exact opposite feeling that it's invoking. The more questions that get answered, the more questions they have. And it's not, oh, we have the entire puzzle together. And so that just adds to the scariness. If you heard this sound and someone told you it's coming from something in the sky, but you can't see that something in the sky, it's hiding in the clouds, and then someone tells you, oh, it's a sound that I was hearing when I lost my military friends. It's a sound that I eventually heard after the disappearance of my son. Oh, I've seen those things in the sky. That would be absolutely terrifying, because you don't know what the sound is, why it's being made, what's the reason behind it. You just know that certain weird or bad things happen when the sound comes up. And how they talk about the sound is so odd. They're like, oh, it's different ships communicating. It's people getting abducted. It's the sound of their ships. It's freaking terrifying. You're telling me there's more than one sound and they're different, and it's all that confusion and curiosity it's going to compound, and it's just terrifying, because while I am understanding one aspect of it, it's leading me to 100 other questions that I didn't even realize I had. And so now I feel like I know even less than when I started and didn't know anything. And then you get confused on the answers to the questions, but then you're still kind of curious because you want to ask more. But it's like, it's terrifying, but it's like a horror movie where you have to sit there and continue to want to know more why, but it's freaking you out. And which is kind of funny, because this movie isn't really like a horror movie in and of itself. It's more suspenseful, mystery, sort of thriller, but not really. Just like sci-fi suspenseful kind of. But it really ramps up that tension because of those feelings of confusion and curiosity that it gives you. It puts you on edge. Your nerves are shot and you're ready to jump because you don't know. You don't know what's coming next. And that is something that is both engaging and terrifying. Now, I said that they had all this tension and stuff, and they had the freaky sound and the cool story. How did they manage to pull it off? Because this movie is actually, it was a first-time feature for the director, awesome. That's so cool. We love to see amazing debuts. It was also kind of a micro budget movie where the movie cost almost, I think, $700,000. That's what I was seeing when I was looking it up. That number could be higher or lower, but it's not as expensive as like a modern day thriller or a modern day horror movie or modern day sci-fi or whatever. While movies can be made cheaply, they are often still pretty expensive, no matter what level it's at. They can be expensive. So how do they manage to still make it pretty engaging and interesting while not having the budget for a big movie monster or something, big spectacle or super scary or something like that to happen? How did they manage to still invoke those feelings while not having the same capabilities? Long takes. And that doesn't necessarily seem scary. If you don't know what a long take is, it just means that the camera is rolling for a longer time before cutting to a different angle. It doesn't change. So typically when you think about a normal scene, there are usually several camera angles that are going to happen. If two characters are talking to each other, you have one angle pointed at one person, and then you have a different angle pointed at the other. They're not one camera that's flipping back and forth. Usually it is one camera, it is several cameras, and you're cutting back and forth in the editing. A long take isn't like that. It's one continuous shot that is just done at once. You're not cutting in between it. And usually in movies, there's not a lot of long takes. Like a long take on the average movie can maybe be a few minutes, maybe 2, maybe 3. And that sometimes is pushing it. It's not very common in the big budget movies as much. But in this movie, a long take could be like 7 or 9 minutes, which that doesn't seem like a long time, but that's a long time in a movie. And while like some movies can use it and it doesn't like really make a difference, like it's impressive, but it doesn't really do a lot. In this movie, it is pretty impressive because they had a low budget, and that's probably why they did it, so that if your actors could get a long take, you don't have to spend more time shooting the same scene a lot of times and having to move the camera constantly. You can just do one camera, get it done, maybe do a few takes, which takes a half hour. Say you have a 10-minute long take. You have 3 takes. You have 2 that are like pretty good, and then you have 1 for safety. You're like, okay, I think that's enough. That's maybe a half hour of time. If you do that with cutting, you may take 4 hours to cover that same 10 minutes. So that, for budget reasons, can make things go really fast. Great. But because long takes are not used as often in movies, we are not used to seeing them as often. They can be impressive when we do, but in the context of this movie, where it's a sci-fi, it's mystery, it's kind of thriller, that can be a little bit unnerving. It's broken from the norm. You're not used to that type of edit. So when it's lingering on a little bit more than you would think, it gets a little weird. If a character's talking, so like the radio guy, Everett, when he's talking with the military guy on the phone, it's just focused on him for like 5 minutes. I can't remember if it's zooming in or if it just kind of is static, but you're just hearing the military guy talk about his story in this kind of calm and weirdly terrifying voice. Be like, I remember when I was out doing this thing and we started hearing that sound. Creepy. And because you're not changing where you're looking, it's weirder. Makes it feel more real. It feels like you were sitting there in the conversation. You're like, I got a phone call and I have to sit here and listen to the whole terrifying story. That's interesting. And that makes the feeling a lot more. It goes back to that confusion and curiosity. It's like you're sitting there and you're like, well, now I have more questions for you I want to ask. And then you keep watching this person talk about their story. And so those long takes push it further. It makes you wonder things like, oh, what could that sound be coming from? Why did these things happen to those people? Why does all this stuff happen? And that comes from a long take. It's a combination of everything, really, but the long take is kind of what is making your brain have to think more in that situation, because you're not being stimulated by the camera changing. It is just making you sit there and focus. And there are certain points where like a long take is actually without any visual at all, where they'll have like a phone call and stuff and they just cut out the visual entirely and you just have to listen. And that makes you have to sit in and be like, what are they really saying? And that, so good from a filmmaking perspective and from a story perspective too, but fantastic. But it just makes it, I think, a little bit more unnerving because it's not being broken up as much. You're not getting the fast cuts and quick changes that we're used to and the kind of stuff that's been in media for the past couple decades. And that slowness, I think it's the impatience that we have. We want to know stuff and we want to know it now. And typically a movie will give it to you now. It'll cut through it fast so that you can understand. But to make it so that you as the audience, just like these characters, not understand, you have to give them the long take. You have to make them sit there and think about it and be like, I want what's coming next. What is happening? And I was feeling that way when I was watching this movie. And so that, I think, is great. It's just a combination of everything in this movie. That long take, the mysterious sound, the curiosity and confusion that you and all these characters are experiencing that make this movie so interesting. So now let's get into our rating of The Vast of Night. If you don't know our easily entertained rating scale from least to best, it is garbage, once is fine, right mood, quotable, go to, and all day, every day. And I would say that this movie, it's probably an all day, every day for me. Okay. It's not very often where I can sit and really get into a movie right from the get-go. And I think it did that perfectly. It fully accomplished that for me. If you've seen it and you have a different rating, let me know down in the comments. When you see it, you can come back and also reply in the comments what you thought, because it's great. But that is it for this episode of Easily Entertained. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave a like and subscribe so that you can be notified of all new episodes every Tuesday. It's always a great time. And if you have any suggestions for movies, TV shows, books, video games, any entertainment property that you can think of that you'd like to see me talk about, comment down below. Let me know and I will try and get it on my list. Okay. But until next time, bye.